So General Conference 2024, 2020, whatever. It's important for us to understand that there are structured rules and a process that we've been using in the past. And by the way, there are other ways of running meetings, but we utilize these Robert's rules and parliamentary procedure generally interchangeably and with regard to language of how we utilize the meeting. So what do we have? Well, why do we have these rules? Well, ideally, and by the way, I'm going to be flying because I want to make sure I leave enough time for everybody else to do what they need to do. The processes, they're designed to ensure that everyone has a chance to participate and to share ideas. We utilize a queue process, and I'm not sure if we're going to use the same electronic process, but it's a process by which you can actually essentially raise your hand and try and get into to speak by using the electronic device. And that there'll be instructions about that when we get to conference, but it should not be used to prevent discussion of important issues. And by the way, it can be. And that's the big concern, that it can be utilized for the purposes of trying to shut people down as opposed to share and be in conference in the form of Christian conferencing with each other. So this is what we don't want. If you have an idea, just shout it out. Why? Because just imagine every delegate from every place across the world all at the same time wanting to speak, and we have no order. So we try to figure out a way of trying to preserve some quantum of decorum. And we do that with some cornerstones that are part of what we commonly refer to as parliamentary procedure. And there are 7. And as I said, I'm going to fly through these. I will make this PowerPoint available to Garlinda after, and then we can look at it. But there's 7 basic fundamental motions that can come through this. There are others, but these are the basic ones. 1, main motion, amendment to the amendment. And just to answer your question, because I know someone probably is going to probably be Geo, would say, is there an amendment to the amendment to the amendment? And the answer is no. And I can answer that question later. Referring it to someplace else, like a committee or for another action, postpone to a certain time, lay on the table previous questions. These are all things that are recognized in the structure of parliamentary procedure and that we utilize within our general conference proceedings. So let's talk a little bit about these basic elements under Robert's Rules. And Robert's Rules, it was created in a rather militaristic environment to try and maintain some order, but they've been adopted and adapted by a number of organizations. The first one is the main motion. So that would be what we're talking about on the floor. The main issue. If the main issue is, should we talk about whether or not we should have a cotton candy party today, that's the main motion. Whether or not we should have pink cotton candy or blue cotton candy may very well be something that needs to be amended, but it's not the main motion. It's introduced as a new piece of business or purpose or propose a decision on a particular action. And how is that done? And we're going to talk about how to do that. A lot of people say, I make a motion. That's not right. The language and the language to actually be appropriate, even though you would be recognized if you say, I make a motion, is I move that. And then you state what the purpose is of your motion. And it usually requires a second in order for it to be appropriately before the body. And you will hear that motion is on the floor. Is there a second? After limited discussion, the main motion is put up to a vote. And that may be after certain other things, such as amendments. So what's another motion? One is to postpone indefinitely. And that is a type of motion that can actually stop the proceedings and the debate on a particular question. And oftentimes with that, and it should not be abused, but for instance, if there is an issue and everybody on the floor is saying, we're just not going to get to this and it needs to be handled and we'll see it in 4 years or whenever the next general conference is going to happen, it may be postponed to a date certain or indefinitely. But there too, it's I move to postpone. right? The language is important because that then makes you as a member of a person that gets the floor at General Conference clear that you know what you're doing. Amendment to the amendment. And the reason I put this up here is for you to realize you can go two levels on amendments, and that's the best way to keep it in mind. You know, when people say, I would like to amend that, and they get up and they make an amendment, let's make it on Thursday and not Friday. Well, that amendment is now before the body first. Then, if it is agreed to, it becomes part of the main motion that's before the body. An amendment to the amendment would be, let's do it on Friday. Someone says, no, I'd like to amend that to Thursday. And then the amendment to the amendment would be Thursday at 5 o'clock. And therefore, you would vote on the 5 o'clock first. You would vote on the Friday or the Thursday versus the Friday second. And then that all becomes part of the main motion. And that then is handled by the body and put to a vote. So it would be, I move to amend the motion on the floor, and then state your motion on how you would amend it. Next, refer to a committee or to commit. And that may be something, for instance, there may be a question on the floor, and I see, our money people here, where we say we'd like to refer this to GCF&A for them to study and tell us what the cost would be of X, Y, or Z. And that is an appropriate motion. And according to our rules, it would require a vote. And by the way, there's a cheat sheet that's usually given and put in the ADCA, the Advanced Daily Christian Advocate, that allows us to know what our particular levels of votes are for any particular motion. And I would encourage us to look at that. I pulled an old one out, but I didn't want to confuse folks because I thought if it changes and the rules change, we want to know that then as opposed to what's in the past. Moving the question. This is a big one. Okay, Garlinda and I are having a discussion on the floor. We're talking about how important it is to save seashells. And the seashells that we are moving from the seashell shore are now going to be the main question. And all of a sudden, one of the very, very skilled people stand up and they get the floor and they come in and they say, I move the main question. Assuming that we've had all the speeches in favor and against, which are as per our rules, the chair, which is usually a bishop, will have to recognize that motion because it's a motion that takes precedence over others. And then the vote immediately goes not to the main motion, but to the question of whether or not we should move to the main motion and stop debate at that time. That is an important one because that is often used to stop further debate, and it can be utilized to try and move something along if we get stuck in that treadmill or that quagmire that happens when folks decide that they can't let something go, or it's at a time where it's heated and it's necessary for the body to be able to make a decision. Laying it on the table. That's basically when they say, let's table it, that's putting it to the side, and it's to be considered at a later meeting or at another time. And usually, when that is done, it should be a motion made to table to a time certain. And again, that is then I move to table this matter and discuss it until the next meeting or the next general conference or until we hear back from GCF&A. And then, of course, adjournment. That's many of you is going to be a favorite. Let's adjourn. But adjournment should not be confused with recess. That being recessing, because adjournment basically is a motion that ends the meeting, and general conference will not be an adjournment until all of our business that we're going to handle is done, and then we are adjourned to the next general conference. So there's some tips for parliamentary procedure. And again, this PowerPoint will be available to you. The main motion must be moved, seconded, and stated by the chair before it can be discussed. In other words, the main motion on the floor, the chair would say, is whether or not we should have pink cotton candy. And now let's go to discussion. It's been moved and seconded. And then you speak to the motion. And the chair can decide, obviously, based on if we're doing it electronically, the queue will decide who's up next, but he will ask for motion speakers in favor and against. If approved, the motion is approved, it's voted on. If it's to be disapproved, it's voted down. So it's a yay or a nay vote. If you approve the idea of the motion but want to change it, you amend it. And if you want advice or information, here's one. You can ask for a particular information, and we're going to talk about this. You can ask for, let's suppose you don't know. Are we talking about real cotton candy, or are we talking about fake cotton candy that's used on Hollywood sets? That would be what's called a point of information. And that also is important so that everybody has the full and necessary information to move forward and to vote. If you feel you can't handle it, you can handle it better than the assembly. If someone else can, you move to refer it to a committee that has the power to do so. Other tips. You feel that there's a pending question that should be delayed, you can move that to be tabled. And others, if you want time to think the motion over, move the consideration be deferred to a certain time. In other words, we need a recess. Can we defer this until we come back from the recess? That's one of them. If discussion is unnecessary and it's going on, as I said, you can move the main motion or move the previous question. All of these tips, and I see them as I have them here, are important to understand that the assembly should give further consideration to the motion that is on the floor at the time, or any ancillary motion that comes after it in that order. And that's important for you to understand. If indeed there's a motion that's on the floor, for instance, there's a motion about the cotton candy that's on the floor, and someone says, oh, I think we should really just talk about whether or not we should ride the merry-go-round. Well, that would be out of order because the first motion that's on the floor is the motion about cotton candy. And therefore, if we want to talk about the merry-go-round, we talk about the merry-go-round, but it comes in succession as it's appropriate in the timing, because the main motion on the floor is whether or not we're going to have pink cotton candy as opposed to blue cotton candy. And I hope that people will remember the cotton candy reference. If you think that the matter is introduced is not germane, you can say a point of order. Point of order takes precedence over other motions. And what that is something is not being done right, or excuse me, correctly or correctly according to the rules, or it's a violation of the rule. And normally on a point of order, someone gets the floor and they state, bishop or chair, point of order. The bishop says, what is your point? And then the response is, this is inconsistent with rule number ABC in our rules and should be handled in this way. And then it falls to for the chair to make a ruling on the point of order. And that's important because a point of order is like stepping on the brakes in midday traffic. It stops everything. More tips? If you think that too much time is being consumed by speakers, you can move to limit the speaker time. And we do that by the third day, right? People have been speaking, they get the full, whatever, 2 or 3 minutes is, and we ask the body to vote on whether or not we should limit speeches to X minutes as opposed to the numbers that were originally set. And that is to make sure that we get in the business that we need to get into when we start seeing the clock going tick-tock, tick-tock. And if a motion has several parts and you wish to vote differently on these parts, you can move to divide the question or divide the motion. And many times that can happen because the motion may be to go to the carnival, have pink cotton candy, and ride the Ferris wheel, and then ride the merry-go-round. In that, there are 4. 1, go to the carnival. 2, cotton candy. 3, Ferris wheel. 4, merry-go-round. So it may be necessary for people to say, I want to go, I want cotton candy, but I don't want to ride any of those rides because if I eat cotton candy, I'm going to get sick. And if I ride those rides, I'm going to get sick. So those may be a basis of moving to divide the question and vote on each one separately. And that can happen in a lot of ways and does happen with regard to certain motions that make their way to the floor, or even pieces of legislation that have come to the floor that in it may have different points that need to be considered. Okay, so the agenda for this meeting is to try and figure out why we're having this meeting. Uh, that doesn't happen with us normally because we will have legislation ahead of time. We will know most of those things that are be coming out of committee because on a daily basis that will be reported. But most certainly, we don't want to be in a situation where we're making it up as we go along, because that just simply does not make it easy for people to follow. And it's not fair for folks that are not necessarily able to keep up with the speed of the information that's going back and forth. And by the way, my friends, it does happen rather quickly with parliamentary procedure and Robert's rules. And it behooves us all to be a little bit on our P's and Q's so that we can actually know how quickly things can go. And actually, a vote should not take place until everybody's ready. But very often, votes take place and people say, what just happened? So we want to make sure that we're well informed, and I would encourage you and your delegations to review these together. And I'm more than happy, or other people may be more than happy, to try and give a primer on this as well. Okay, other common phrases, and we're almost done. Refer, table, lift from the table. These are all words that have meaning in parliamentary procedure and Robert's rules. Amend, substitute. For instance, instead of a motion just for pink cotton candy, I move to amend by substitution, that it be blue cotton candy and not pink cotton candy. Separating the question, which we call dividing the question, dividing the House. In other words, I can't tell how many votes there really are because the bishop said, let's do it by hand. So we divide the question by utilizing our electronic means, or standing potentially can be asked for, but a particular way of dividing the House, that being making the question clear on how we are voting, can be asked for from the floor, and adjournment, of course. Let's just do a little play acting. I move that. You make the motion. You ask for a second, or the bishop asks for a second. It's discussed. Ruling of the motion could be out of order or in order. It's debated, and then a vote is conducted. But there it is, I move that. We go to the carnival. Point of order, or excuse me, point of information. It must be in the form of a question. For instance, I don't quite understand why we're doing it this way. Could someone explain it to me? That is a question. Or could someone please explain to me what the term conflagration means that was given by the person speaking about environmental justice, or whatever may be asked. But that should be in the form of a question for clarity's sake, and that there can be a point of information that would clear something up. And normally, if one person is thinking it, the second person or third person, or maybe 100 people are thinking the same thing. Point of order, we talked about, and that's a big one, right? After you say point of order, you should be prepared to talk about, if indeed you think something is out of order, exactly why it is out of order, because the chair will ask you, what is your point? And at that time, you should say, my point is that pursuant to Rule 34 of, and I'm just making this up now, it is out of order that we do this at this time because the rule says that you must do it at another particular time or a particular way. And then the chair will rule. Your point is well taken. We'll proceed immediately to a vote on this, or we'll address it that way, or you're incorrect, and we'll hear comments about what's on the floor right now. But as far as a point of order, your request to do it a certain way is not appropriate. And there are examples. Point of personal privilege. A lot of people just think it's because I want to do something, it's my personal privilege to do so. No, it's usually something that deals with temperature, can't hear, there's noise in the background, or there's a sister or there's a brother who is having a difficult time understanding. Could someone slow down so that the interpretation can take place? Those are important ones. And for instance, it would be point of personal privilege. And by the way, it does not need to be your point of personal privilege. It can be a privilege raised on behalf of someone else. For instance, if someone is not being able to gain access to the arena and we've started our business, but because that person has a disability of some sort, is not in the arena, and we want to give that person the opportunity to participate, a point of personal privilege can be raised for that person so that they can just get into the arena, so that we can make sure that they are not excluded because of something that was created that should not have been created. So you see a question here. Can the speaker please use the microphone because we cannot hear in the back where we're sitting? And then the response would be, Mr. Green or Ms. Green, would you please come forward, use the microphone because we can't hear what you're saying. Come to microphone number 4. Moving the question, and again, we talked about that, stops all debate. You go immediately to the question of whether or not you're going to stop the debate, and then it goes forward. And again, this is outlined here. The question has been moved. Is there a second? If it's been seconded, we'll not vote on whether to end the, we'll now vote and proceed to a vote on the motion which we were discussing. And if it is yay, then the yays have it, and it closes debate, and we move to the main question. What we don't want is people using up floor time. And a lot of times people get the floor and they have no idea what they're going to say, how they're going to say it, or what they're intending to say. And actually, if you have nothing to say, your presentation shouldn't take 1 minute, 2 minutes, or 3 minutes. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the opportunity to speak, but the need to speak, particularly on a particular issue, should be governed by having something that is going to try and move us forward in the work that we are doing together. And I'm going to encourage folks, just again, this is a primer. This is just a little thumbnail sketch of things that might be important to consider. But knowing that there is a procedure and being able to engage the procedure, even to the smallest degree, makes you a better delegate and makes you more able to handle the floor of general conference in a competent way that's going to make the people that elected you to be there very proud, because you won't get lost in the sauce.